Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Zapier and Waterminder. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John.
How are you feeling rested now that we're back from WWDC?
It's been quite a week. I feel much better now. Yeah, I feel like last year it was much worse. So when I came back from WWDC 2016, I basically got sick for a week. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't work. I was basically useless for a week.
Yeah, I remember. You were really sick last year. You got a little sick this year, but not nearly like you were last year.
Got a little sick this year, but overall, I feel like I'm okay now. I'm actually working and I'm thinking about what was announced. And man, it was such a great week. I feel like everyone got a little bit of everything they were hoping for. And that's great.
Yeah, that was great because everybody you ran into was happy about something. It may not have been the same thing, but everybody had a little something to hold on to this year.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're a Mac person or an iPad person, so many improvements all across the line, like even Siri with Apple Music and the HomePod, the teaser of the iMac Pro, which is real pretty, by the way. It was a really great week, and especially because I got to meet so many people. So I was really happy, to put a face on a voice that I tend to hear on a podcast, or just to meet so many listeners and readers. It was lovely, really.
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, that's the best time of year for us because there's so many people who, first of all, there's all of our friends who live all over the world that we oftentimes don't get to see more than just once a year. But we also had the opportunity to meet with a ton of listeners and get their feedback and talk to them about the show, which is great because, I mean, otherwise it's just you and I talking over Skype. It's just nice to meet the people who are actually listening to the show as well.
Yeah, and you were walking around with the App Store stickers, giving them out to people.
Yes, I did. I've still got more. Yeah, and it was also great to run into a bunch of developers because, we write about apps day in and day out all week long, and a lot of the developers we've met over the years, but there are a lot who we haven't, and it's just nice to talk to the people who make the apps and see what their plans are for the coming year, which is one of my favorite things to do. I spent a ton of time, especially on Wednesday and Thursday, doing that after, we were kind of done with the keynote and some of the initial parties and things early in the week.
As you were doing that, I was basically hiding in my hotel room, writing the iPad Pro article that came out a few days ago.
Right.
There were people actually hanging out in our hotel room, and I was in the bedroom just hiding with my iPad and trying to get some work done. And because I was working on that stories on the iPad Pro 10.5, I feel like the sense of dread that usually accompanies WWDC and the iOS announcements that usually permeates the second half of the week still hasn't really hit me so far, which is I need to get a start on my annual iOS review, and I need to watch all the sessions that I couldn't go to, and I need to take some notes because September seems far away, but actually it's only 12 weeks, so it's not a lot of time.
Yes.
When you consider it like that. So the summer usually for me means I have this big project coming, and I need to focus on that. And overall, because of, I was at WWDC, and because of all these iPad news and the iPad Pro and the article, I feel like it was kind of stressful in the end to be able to have this story ready, but it made me appreciate the conference even more because I didn't have the constant feeling of, oh my God, I need to start working on my iOS review. So I think I enjoyed San Jose more. San Jose was lovely, and I enjoyed the conference more because I didn't start thinking about iOS 11 and taking notes and just being obsessed with the review right away. So overall, double thumbs up.
Right.
WWDC.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was one of those people hanging out outside your bedroom door for part of that time, and I was mighty impressed that you stayed in there with the door shut and just wrote for hours on end while we were outside chatting.
Yeah, it was really creepy. We were basically just hanging out in the other room.
It was you had a very nice hotel room that had a little living space in one room and then the bedroom in the other, and you could shut the door between, which ended up working perfectly for you since you had to get that article done.
Yeah, everybody was in the other room. I was like, leave me alone. I need to get some writing done.
Thanks to Zapier for supporting App Stories this week. Zapier is easy automation for busy people. Zapier is the glue that ties all sorts of different web apps together, moving information between them automatically so you don't have to. That's exactly how we use it here at Mac Stories. We're a small team, and Zapier allows us to focus on creating content without getting bogged down with busy work. Zapier is deeply integrated with how we manage Club Mac stories. For example, anytime Stripe flags a payment for review when someone is signing up for the club, Zapier creates an urgent task in Todoist for Federico. That way, he can easily and quickly see if there are any payments that need to be approved manually before the potential member gets frustrated and gives up on the sign-up process. Another interesting example that I read about recently on Zapier's website is a workflow that adds Google Analytics data to a Google spreadsheet for every post added to a blog. The Zap monitors the RSS feed, and when a new post hits the site, it waits for a set amount of time, collecting analytics, and then drops the data into a spreadsheet automatically. These disparate functions work because Zapier connects with over 700 apps, including 17 of its own, for doing things like parsing text from emails, running workflows on a schedule, formatting text and translating it, and much, much more. Zapier also supports detailed workflows with multiple steps and filters, so that they'll only run on the data that you want them to. Nobody likes busy work. It's a drag that takes you away from being creative. Instead of slogging through a pile of administrative tasks, let Zapier make you happier. Visit zapier.com/appstories for a 2-week free trial. Plans start at just $20 a month. Again, that's zapier.com/appstories. Thanks again to Zapier for sponsoring the show. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, not so much new stuff in iOS 11. I figured, because it's the theme of the show, really, and because it's one of the major announcements from WWDC, it's the all-new App Store coming with iOS 11, coming later this year. Major redesign, profoundly different focus from Apple on what they want to do with the App Store. So I thought we should talk about it and sort of understand the potential of this new App Store, the problems that Apple may run into, and what it means for us, what it means for developers.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, it's a very ambitious app store. There are a lot of changes, both for end users, for consumers who will be going to an all-new store that's redesigned and looks different, but also for developers in terms of what kind of content they can provide on their product pages as well.
Yeah, this redesign is really not like Apple Music, for example. Last year, you could argue that it was all different and all new, but the basic structure was kind of the same. You still have your music library. You can go to the Apple Music editor recommendations. The basic sense of navigation and what the product is was the same. With the App Store, everything is changing, not just the look. Even the mission, you could say it's changing. The front page is gone. The front page, as you know it, with the new apps we love, new games we love, the banners at the top, that is no more. The new front page is this tab called the Today tab. And in the Today tab, Apple wants to provide a series of daily stories. They call them stories. Stories about apps. It's kind of familiar. Anyway, if only there was a podcast or a website about that.
I'd love to listen to something like that.
So they're going to do these stories. They look like cards. They look really nice, actually, in the beta. Their idea is to make the App Store a daily destination for people to go to and read more and discover something inspiring or interesting about an app or about a game or about a developer. So to give an example, last week, Monument Valley 2, the sequel to the popular iOS game, launched at WWDC during the keynote. That was part of this promotion between Apple and us, to the developers of Monument Valley, to feature the game heavily on the new App Store. So if you're running iOS 11, go to the App Store, go to the Today tab, and you will get the idea of what Apple wants to do. For example, one of their stories is this world premiere of The Art of the Impossible. And it's basically an article, a story that combines video, screenshots, quotes, and text to describe what Monument Valley is. And really, all of these changes coming to the Today tab put a heavy focus on curation from Apple, a daily commitment to coming up with stories, coming up with interviews, coming up with collections, and to provide those to millions of users every day. And at the same time, Apple is also revising the overall structure of the App Store. The App Store is going to be split into two parts, games and apps. They're going to be separate. They're going to have their own front pages. They're going to have their own top charts. And they're going to be in two distinct places in the navigation of the App Store. And finally, search being completely revamped. In addition to searching for apps and bundles, I guess, you can now also search for stories. You can search for categories. You can search for all of these in-app purchases, which is also something we're going to talk about. All of these elements revolving around apps are now searchable, indexed, and available directly into an app's product page. It's a massive, massive change for the App Store. And again, it's such a commitment for Apple that I almost wonder if they're going to pull it off or not.
Yeah, it's really a huge undertaking. And I think Matt and Reese, who wrote about this on his blog this week, and we linked to it on Mac Stories, and I think he really kind of hit the nail on the head, because he described the old App Store as a database. If you think about it, it was really just rows and columns of app icons more than anything else, as well as a few banner ads. And now it's being transformed into something that's a little bit more like a tech blog or a magazine, as opposed to going to the store to find something that you need. The idea is that you'll go to the App Store because you want to discover something. It's more of a destination as opposed to a tool and a utility in a way.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. It's more like I'm going there because I'm sure I will find something, and less of I'll go there when I need something. So it's more like when you open the YouTube front page, you know you're going to come across a video you're interested in. And that's because YouTube and Google have pretty good algorithm in terms of showing you stuff that you want to watch. But the sense that I'm getting from this redesign, and that Apple is betting heavily not on algorithms to show you what you need, but on humans and on people and editorial team to tell a cohesive story every day. So let's go over this today section, because I think it's the most important change. What Apple is saying here is we want every single day to show you an app of the day, a game of the day, and we want to show you stories. Stories can be a little article about a featured app or a game, such as Monument Valley, interviews with the developers, even tips and tricks. Apple is going to do tips and tricks to tell people how to use an app, whether it's a new one or an app they're already familiar with. For example, the new App Store launched with a series of tips on using Visco, the photo app. So I'm guessing that Apple is not only going to talk about new apps that came out 2 days ago, but also existing gems, existing popular titles that people can rediscover. And I guess they're also going to talk about to influencers and celebrities, just my guess, but they're going to try to stay relevant. They're going to try to talk about culturally relevant events, such as the NBA Finals, for example. There's a dedicated story in the Today tab. But what I want to talk about here, especially because we have Mac Stories, we have a small team of people, we actually do write about apps, and we know what it's like to discover apps and to produce content every single day. This is a massive effort on Apple's part to say we have 2 million apps on the App Store. God knows how many users go to the App Store every single day. And we're gonna write 4, 5 different stories every single day for the rest of forever, I guess, if this works.
Yeah. No, even if it was just one story,
yes,
is a massive undertaking. Because on top of because it's not even just that they're doing this with the App Store, they're doing it with each App Store. They're doing it in multiple locations. I don't know that they're rolling this out to every single country that has an App Store out of the box, but they are planning to do different articles in different regions of the world that are culturally relevant to that region. So we're really talking about not just a team in Cupertino writing about the US App Store, for instance. We're talking about multiple teams spread out across the world who are presumably writing for Europe and Asia, and maybe at some point specifically Italy versus Germany or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, this is such a different, it feels like a different Apple from the company that used to manage the App Store until a few years ago. In a way, and maybe this sounds crazy, but in a way, there's been a lot of speculation about Apple creating getting into content creation, Apple getting into original video production, sort of launching their own Netflix. And they've been doing that to an extent, you could say, with Apple Music, with Planet of the Apps, with the new Carpool Karaoke series. But to me, this App Store, Apple assembling this kind of editorial team, this feels to me like the actual debut of Apple into content creation. It's basically like a magazine from Apple, like you said, like a tech blog on the front page of the App Store.
Right.
And this feels like everything, every single part of this is done by Apple. It's not like Planet of the Apps that it's a production, or Carpool Karaoke, they bought the rights to the show. This is all done internally from Apple, by Apple, across multiple regions, across multiple teams. And I wonder if people are going to respond well to this. Because, again, millions of people have been used to the idea of, I just go to the App Store when I need something, or I just want to go to the top charts and see what's popular. Here, the idea is to sort of provide culture of apps and games and convince people to read and to open the App Store every single day.
Right.
Which sounds silly, but I don't know, in my experience, most people don't want to read and they don't engage with this kind of content on a personal level.
Right. I mean, there are only a few crazy people like you and me who actually go to the App Store every day and click around through all the tabs. And I think one thing that is hard about it is if they can't keep the pace up on the content, the first or maybe the second time you go there and the articles are the same, that's going to make you less likely to go back. Mm-hmm. I also kind of look at this like, if you think of it as almost like Apple's version of a website like The Verge, it starts to make sense what you're saying about video and so forth, because The Verge, obviously they put out a ton of content. They put out a lot of articles every day, every week, but they also have video. They also do podcasts. If it's that sort of broad, it feels to me like maybe this is heading towards that sort of broad-based content production that's not strictly in the world of writing, but also lapses over into audio and video as well.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about Apple basically assembling a team of bloggers. And I don't mean that in a funny way. It's actually what is happening here, because if you look at the stories,
right,
that is the definition of basically being a blogger. It's short form content in a written form,
chronologically organized.
Yeah, because you can go to the Today tab, you can see all the different days, you can scroll through, you can see, let me see what Apple published on Monday, for example.
Right.
So that is a blog, basically. It doesn't have a feed. I'm not sure it will have a web presence. I think it'll only be limited to the App Store on iOS and maybe on iTunes. But that is a blog, basically. And it's very nice looking, Apple. From a design perspective, the design language, with the card UI, the bold San Francisco fonts, the use of colors, the use of rich graphics, it's beautiful. I really think Apple did an excellent job with sort of taking some elements from Apple News, Apple Music, but optimizing them for the App Store. But aside from the potential problems, I do believe this is a fantastic idea. And I just want to say, I'm super surprised that Apple is doing this. Because of all the things that could have imagined Apple doing with the App Store, this basically a relaunch. I want to say they're relaunching the App Store with a focus on people and human editors writing content and telling people why apps are important. That to me is awesome. And I'm genuinely surprised whether or not it's going to work. I tend to believe it's going to work because it's Apple and they have a lot of money and they can find people. But I'm super surprised and happy that they're doing this.
Yeah, I am too. I like it a lot as well, and I was very surprised. It's just not something. It just came out of left field for me. I never really expected this sort of thing.
Yeah, because all the discussions that we've been having about the App Store, how it's being dominated by freemium apps, and people just go to the App Store to download Pokemon Go and Clash of Clans, and they don't care about the human aspect of apps. And Apple basically did a 180, and they were like, no, people should care about this, and we want to change the minds of people who go to the App Store by telling them why Monument Valley, why us2, why these other developers are a big deal and why you should pay attention to them. And I think if it's done well, the Today tab could bring so much traffic and so much attention to the featured app or the featured game of the day and the developer that is interviewed for a story. And I feel like because of this magazine blog like aspect, any recommendation has the potential of feeling more personal, being more genuine, you know?
Right.
Like it's one thing to see a banner on the front page, it's another to actually read an article written by someone at Apple. I actually wonder if Apple is ever going to have bylines from their editors on the Today tab. Like, this is what Jake from Apple or this is what Lisa from Apple recommends today. That could be nice.
It could be nice. I think that's the kind of thing that makes it even more human, right?
Yeah.
People do that on the web already with their favorite blogs. They know a lot of people know who their favorite writers are, and they follow their favorite writers more than they even follow sites sometimes.
Yeah. Games and apps, there's going to be this separation between them. I think it's a long time coming, and I'm actually happy that it's happening. But, and I wanna hear what you think. There's also the potential problem of what if people just go to the App Store for games and now they have the perfect excuse to never look at apps again.
Yeah, I think this is an important change myself. I don't think it can be understated how buried non-game apps were in the old version of the App Store. So I think it is overall a good thing to separate them out. If that means that 80-90% of the people end up in the game tab instead of the app tab, that I think that's okay, because I don't think that those people who are coming for apps were a smaller percentage of the overall user base to begin with, and it's just easier for them, even if they are only the 20%, to find the apps that they're looking for and not have it cluttered up with freemium games and other things that they might not be interested in. I like a lot that they're separated out. I think too that apps and games are just fundamentally different types of software that lend themselves to different kind of promotion, so that I think Apple can do a lot of different things with each of those tabs that won't look odd when you look at it in the context of the other one, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Overall, I think it's gonna be a positive change. Again, I only have the concern of if you only care about a game, then you just go to the games tab and there's not even the remote chance of stumbling onto an app because you never opened the section. But because it's separate and because it's front and center in the UI, the apps tab is actually in the middle of the top bar.
Right.
There's probably even more of a chance that you actually open it out of curiosity and see what's going on. We'll see.
I think that's kind of what the Today view is for too, right? That's where things get mixed up, and you can see apps as well as games in that section.
And I think it's clever that Apple has these two games and apps views. They're not just like top charts. You can see the top charts and now they're separate. So it's easier to find the top paid apps in the charts. Previously, as you say, they were so buried into the UI that if you went to the top charts, the first app was probably like a number 20 or something, because every top spot was taken by a game.
Right.
But besides the charts, they're also doing like, there's a gallery of app previews, so the videos that developers can upload. There's collections, so you can view collections also in the dedicated sections. For example, now I'm looking at the games tab, and if I scroll, there's charts, there's previews, and there's categories, and then there's a collection called the most beautiful games. So Apple is still injecting a little bit of curation into these two views. So overall, again, I think it's a positive change. I think the philosophical separation of apps and games makes a lot of sense. I want to see how when Apple rolls this out, what it's going to be like in practice. Am I just going to open the App Store for games? Am I going there to browse the categories for other apps? I'm really intrigued.
Thanks to Waterminder for supporting App Stories. Waterminder helps you track your daily water intake with a simple visual interface that makes it easy to log your progress. With iOS and watchOS apps, Waterminder is always close by, ready to record how much you've been drinking each day. Waterminder is customizable, includes achievements to motivate you to drink more, and lets you share your progress with your friends. Download Waterminder today with the App Store link in the show notes. Thanks again to Waterminder for supporting App Stories. The other major change is to the product pages themselves. And here we've got a lot of information that developers can provide. We've actually got, for the first time, subtitles to app names, which is effectively been going on for a long time because there's so many apps that everybody calls their app, I don't know, like Overcast, a podcast player, you know, that kind of thing. And now there's an official field for in the metadata for a subtitle, and both the title and the subtitle can be 30 characters long at the longest, which gets rid of a lot of those spammy keyword titles that we had for a long time in the App Store, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, that is super nice. I'm looking at the app section now, and one example is Breaker, which is a podcast app, and the subtitle, which is separate from the main app name, says "Discover new podcasts" or "Touch Retouch, declutter your photos." So it's a nice combination of here's the app name and here's a brief description of what this app does. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, and just to run through real quickly a few of the other things that are going to change. You can use up to 3 video previews now, which is kind of nice, and they autoplay when you go to the product page, but they autoplay with the audio muted, so you're not going to have to listen to them, but you can see them, and it gives the page a little bit more of a dynamic feel, I think, as well, which is nice.
Yeah.
And then there's 2 different kinds of descriptions now. There's the traditional description of the app that we're all familiar with, but there's also something called promotional text, which is 170 characters that a developer has to say my game's on sale this week, or to say something else, or my app was reviewed by Mac Stories and they loved it, you know, that kind of thing. And what's really interesting about the promotional text is you don't have to update your app in order to change that text on your page, which a lot of people who are listening might not realize, but when you wanted to change your description previously of your app, you had to actually submit a new version of your app. You couldn't just do it whenever you wanted, which is a problem because, at least until we can talk about this in a second, that always resets your ratings. So it would look like you had no ratings at that point.
Yeah, and I think this is another terrific change. I knew so many developers who had to change their descriptions or put stuff into the changelog when an update was coming out. It just makes more sense to have a Twitter-like feed from a developer into the app page where you can say things like promotions or reviews or even tips and tricks maybe, or special events for specific days. So this is very nice. And the ratings changes. I was at one of the sessions where they mentioned this, or maybe it was at the keynote, or probably at the talk show. I don't even remember. Anyway,
it's a long time ago now.
I do remember one moment when someone brought up this change, and there was a huge applause, because the fact that developers were caught into this tension of, should I update my app at the risk of losing my positive ratings, or should I leave my buggy app on the App Store without fixing the problems, but hey, at least I get to keep the ratings? And that was, I think it was Phil Schiller said, that was stupid. So now developers have a way to say, I want to keep my ratings, or we had a problem before, now the problem has been fixed, so let me reset my ratings so people can leave a new review on the App Store. Makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yep, it does. I think it's going to be terrific. And they've changed the layout a little bit too. So now when you see the ratings, you see a number, which is like 4.7 or something like that. It's your average rating in the form of a number, as opposed to just the stars that you see now.
Yeah, I think it looks very nice. And you can swipe through and the ratings. And you can also see, I think in the same screen, you can see the editor's choice comment if the app has been previously featured by Apple.
Right.
It's very nice. It's very friendly looking. Like, it doesn't feel like I'm browsing a product on Amazon anymore. It does feel more like, I don't know, a friendly recommendation or a like, it reminds me of those reviews at the end of video game magazines that I used to buy a long time ago. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, even the reviews are kind of a card-like thing now, where they're in a little gray box and you can swipe between them.
Yeah, there's big change coming to in-app purchases and subscriptions, right?
Yes, you can. Now they're incorporated right into search, which is nice, and they can have their own separate icon, which is a big change. You can promote separate and apart from your app. You can promote an in-app purchase.
That's great. I was looking at the session. I was watching the session, and when they were talking about custom icons, they were showing these examples of basically you can choose an icon that represents the feature or what the user is buying into your app, but you also get this little badge representing the original app icon. So there's no confusion as to whether the in-app purchase works for your app or not. I think it's really well done also from a visual perspective. Again, the design language of the new App Store, I'm really a fan. And I wonder if these changes of separating in-app purchases from the apps and giving them more of a visual identity and making it clear to users what they're actually purchasing, I wonder if this is Apple's way of saying, we looked at previous models, such as charging for software upgrades. We really do believe that the future is free apps with in-app purchases or subscriptions or premium apps even, and we're just gonna double down on these new models rather than using the old ones.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that's probably what's going on here because, before, at least as it stands now on iOS 10, in-app purchases and subscriptions are a little bit buried in a sidebar. They're a little hard to see, and you buy them from within the app itself. Now you're actually going to be able to find these things on the store itself and purchase them right from the store. And if you don't have the underlying app, it'll prompt you to go get that app.
Yeah, maybe in the future there will be the in-app purchase store. So apps, games, and in-app purchases, it's all 3 different front pages. I mean,
I hope not. I hope not. The icons are different for the in-app purchases, which I also, you mentioned the little badge with the original app there, but I think they've done a nice job of differentiating the in-app purchases and subscriptions from the main apps.
Yeah, and especially if you're a parent and you have kids using the App Store, there's a new confirmation sheet that comes up during the payment, and it looks like the Apple Pay UI. There's a panel that slides up from the bottom of the screen. You pay with Touch ID. There's your billing information into this box. And I think the reason of making it look like Apple Pay could be a problem because it looks like, I don't know, when you used to buy a $3 app on the App Store before, you didn't see all these details and you were just like, yeah, sure, whatever, I'm gonna pay with Touch ID. But now you see all of this information, your name, your billing address, your credit card details, and it looks like a more serious sort of purchase, like, oh yeah, I am spending $3.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think it's a great change for parents because it makes it clear what you're actually doing.
Right.
And so I think considering these changes to in-app purchases, I think it makes more sense to make them separate, make them stand out visually, and make them stand out from a buying habit perspective. So now you don't just run through 20 sacks of jams. You actually get this Apple Pay-like UI that tells you, look, you're about to spend $20 on a bunch of coins for this game. Do you want to really do this? So I think overall, it looks different. It looks more serious. I wonder if it's going to turn some people off. But overall, I think it's a net positive.
Right. Yeah, I think so too.
Finally, search. We mentioned basically everything is going to be searchable. So you can search for stories, you can search for categories, in-app purchases, developers, even collections. And I want to focus on this last one. I've been arguing for so many years that Apple should have found a way to let people search for apps by theme. So if I'm someone who doesn't read Mac stories, you really should. But if you don't read Mac stories, you're not familiar with apps, I go to the App Store and I write into the search box, text editors, right? I don't know any specific name. I just know what the type of app I'm looking for. I don't know the product names. And Apple has so many of these collections, like great text editors or apps for writers or apps for freelancers,
Right.
And now these are going to be searchable. And I think it's a great idea because it lets people find stuff based on how people actually look for this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because the App Store editorial team has done a lot of work over the years creating those types of collections.
Exactly.
And they're just very hard to surface without search because there are a handful of them that'll show up on the front page, but the older ones just get buried. But there are a lot of good apps in there still.
Yeah. So it remains to be seen if the App Store search is actually going to be able to show you apps the moment that they come out. There's always the problem of caching. When a new app or a new game is released, you need to wait a few hours before it shows up in the App Store search. But the fact that now you can find all this content in search and you don't have to navigate through every single section or page necessarily, I think that's a great change.
Yep, I agree too.
So overall, I have some concerns, as I said, about is Apple actually going to be able to pull this off? What's going to happen with the separation of apps and games? But I do believe that the basic idea is excellent. These changes are amazing. I honestly couldn't see Apple doing this kind of massive redesign for something that was arguably working pretty well, because the App Store is making Apple and developers a lot of money. But I appreciate that Apple is thinking outside the box here and saying, look, we're already making a ton of money, and this App Store thing is working out pretty well for Supercell and King and other big name developers, but we actually want to bring the humanities into the App Store, and we want to tell stories, and we want to put emphasis on developers, their stories, want to do interviews, want to do video, and we want to feature these new business models. We want to encourage developers to try in-app purchases, to try subscriptions, app previews, universal apps, all of these different and new models. So in a way, it's both Apple and the App Store here. It feels like it's both old and new. Like it's the old type of content. It's articles and videos and interviews, but with a new design and with the focus on new models, new ways to enjoy and support your favorite apps. And if this works, I think it's going to be excellent.
Yeah, I agree. I think the new layout is absolutely fabulous. I love the design, and it just makes everything feel a lot less cluttered. And I get the fact that, we did hear some people who are concerned about the lower density app store because there'll be fewer, when you open up the app, there will be fewer apps that are obvious to you when you first open it up. But I think in the end, it's a good thing, because I think it's good for the consumers, because it's less cluttered when they go there, and they can they'll probably more likely to explore. But as long as this is better for users of the app, I think in the end, it's going to be better for developers as well. And I share a lot of your concerns about whether Apple can pull this off. It is an enormous project. The good thing is, though, is that it's the kind of thing that lends itself to throwing a lot of bodies at the problem. So they just need to be willing to spend the money and find the people who can write the content to get it done. Because, there's, you and I both know very well, there's only so many articles you can squeeze out of a person in a 24-hour period,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a pretty easy formula, I think, in that sense, which gives me a little optimism that actually they'll figure it out and be able to do it. And hopefully, I think it's super ambitious to try to roll it out worldwide and have different content in different countries, but I think that's also a great thing. And maybe they'll start as kind of a more regional type of store, we don't really know yet, and then expand into more country-specific type content at some point down the road. But either way, I think it's a positive change, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Apple does with it. Okay, Federico, I think that's it for this week. Thanks again to our sponsors, Zapier and Waterminder. Thanks to everyone who's left a review or rated App Stories in iTunes, too. It means a lot to both of us that you're enjoying the show. And if you have feedback, one thing that I don't think we've mentioned too much in the past is that we have an email address, and you can email us at hello@appstories.net, or you can always find the show on Twitter, which is @appstoriesnet. You can also find both of us writing on Mac Stories every week, and on Twitter, where Federico is @Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm @John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.